Welcome to Assess the Impact of Mentorship on Sense of Belonging. This is the first of a three-part series that we will be hosting here at Mentor Collective. It is a three-part series designed to help you understand how to complete your own impact analyses and how to leverage that information at your institution. The first of these series will be focused on sense of belonging. All right, so just a couple quick housekeeping items before we dive in. This webinar is being recorded and we'll share that recording with you afterwards in a follow-up email, along with some additional related educational resources. We'll actually record all three of these in our series, so you'll be able to have access to all three of them. On the screen, check out a few best practices for ensuring your virtual experience with us today is seamless. I will hand it over to our presenter for today, Annemiek Rice, in just a sec. But while Annemiek is presenting, myself and Director of Partner Success, Jess Kitt, will be available to answer any questions that you may have. We have a Q&A feature that you can take advantage of in the chat. And at the end of today's session, you're also more than welcome to come off mute and ask questions live. All right, so like I had said, this is the first of a multi-part series on the value of conducting your own impact analysis. The second part will cover using impact analyses to connect mentorship to MELT and term-to-term persistence and will be held later in the month. The third part, held at the end of October, will connect mentorship to academic progress. If you've signed up for one event, you have access to all three. And I'll drop the link, the registration link in the chat actually, so you have the dates and times on your calendar. And if you've already registered, you'll also be notified with email reminders ahead of each event. This specific event is going to talk to you about how to conduct your own impact analysis, as well as multiple approaches to using that data within your institution to really enhance the effectiveness of your mentorship programs and your overall student success strategy. Annemiek will also dive into practical ways to translate those data findings, which can sometimes be really complex at first, but she'll give you some practical ways to translate that information into initiatives to make stronger, more inclusive learning environments across your institution. Our research team that put together the impact analyses guidelines were developed by Dr. C.G. Heiser with contributions from Annemiek Rice and Mentor Collective. And a bio on CG. CG is the founder of Co-Creating Action. She is an award-winning researcher, seasoned professional in education, evaluation, and strategic planning. She teaches anti-racist methodologies at American University. She also teaches contemporary issues in higher education at New England College and applying and leading assessment in higher education for the Student Affairs Assessment Leaders organization. She holds degrees from Bucknell University, Kent State, and University of North Carolina at Greensboro. CG has led assessment, evaluation, and strategic planning initiatives really across sectors. She most recently contributed to NSF grants supporting underrepresented students in STEM and conducted qualitative research on factors influencing student choices in pursuing post-secondary education. She currently collaborates on reducing racial disparities in prison diversion programs across the state of Illinois, and she's researching how policies shape equity work across the state system of community college. CG developed the impact analysis guidelines as well as the recommendations for using the analysis data to create institutional impact. And your presenter for today, Annemiek Rice, has spent her career in higher education guiding institutions in their journey to use data and technology more effectively. In doing so, she has consulted with really hundreds of institutions seeking to accelerate their practice of student success, learning assessment, and institutional effectiveness. We're really lucky here at Mentor Collective to have her currently serve as our Vice President of Partner Success. She previously served in the same role at Anthology. During her career in higher education, Annemiek has worked in academic advising, strategic enrollment management, accreditation, and assessment leadership. She's authored publications on topics of equity-centered assessment and served as a speaker and consultant for the Center for First-Generation Student Success. Annemiek holds a master's in applied educational psychology from Northeastern and a bachelor's in neuroscience and journalism from Lehigh. And Automate served as a consultant in building the impact analysis guidelines. And from here on out, I will turn it over to her to hear her expertise in leading us through today's session.
Thank you so much. Also just want to say I'm very excited about sharing what CG has been working on and consulting with the team here at Mentor Collective. We knew when we wanted to meet this need for our partners that we wanted to take a lot of the perspective and guidance that we had developed over the years and pair it with really the most cutting edge perspectives on assessment in higher education, and particularly with an equity focused lens. So I'm really grateful to CG for agreeing to work with us on this, work with us on this, and excited to show off some of the products of her endeavors. I know Jen gave a long, complicated bio for me. I am a total data geek. I am very excited to dive into this today, but I'm really interested in how to make data accessible for people who don't identify as total data geeks. It's kind of the benefit of having an undergraduate degree in neuroscience journalism is you take complex things that intimidate people and explain them in ways that hopefully make a little bit more sense. So that's what I'm hoping to do with our time today, is to make answering these questions with data a little bit more accessible for those of you who might feel a little bit intimidated by that, and to give you a template and a starting point for that conversation and fluency. So I'm going to start off in each of these sessions with a foundation of the literature. So what evidence do we have over decades of peer-reviewed literature for connections between concept A and concept B? Because those are the foundational research projects that we base some of our assessment practices on. So really important, if you are going to do this analysis, that you feel confident in this, that you can include some of these sources and citations in your own research and presentations at your institution. It can help with credibility, but it can certainly help you gain buy-in from other stakeholders. So as a highlight, and everything that I'm sharing today has a cited link in our web article that Jen is going to drop in the chat, so you don't need to look these up. What do we know from 50 years of peer-reviewed literature in higher education? One, student belonging is a key factor in student success. For over 50 years, the importance of that has been very clear in a lot of research. Tinto is like the master early stage element where we see this, but it's been repeated decade after decade. Then the next connection is that research supports the finding that students with peer mentors report higher levels of belonging. And there are many different diverse studies in this case on diverse student populations. We also can add to that research is suggesting that students who are mentoring relationships have higher academic self-efficacy, higher GPAs, stronger utilization of resources, greater persistence, and greater retention. And then finally, I'll also add that sense of belonging is often connected to increased academic progress and reduced symptoms of stress, in particular for certain populations of college students, like first-generation college students of certain racial or ethnic identities, and so forth. So we really have a lot to land on here to show a connection between sense of belonging and mentorship, and also sense of belonging in a lot of these other factors. I want to highlight a few pretty recent pieces of literature that are easy to read or school yourself up on as you're diving in. This is a study from Titan Partners that looks at two concepts, awareness of student support services and a spectrum of belongingness. And they find a relationship. We don't know necessarily which causes which, but we know there is a relationship between the two, that as belongingness increases, so does awareness of support services, and the converse also being true. So we can potentially look at sense of belonging and say there is a relationship between a lower sense of belonging and a lower awareness of resources. How do we solve for both of those problems? Sneak peek, the answer is certainly peer mentorship, among many other great interventions. And then also I want to highlight Nessie's research. Nessie is a very well-known multi-study of student engagement, multi-institutional study of student engagement. And in some recent years, Nessie has added very specific questions about sense of belonging, I think 2020, and correlated them with other elements of the NESI instrument. So the NESI instrument looks at all of these types of topics that you see on the screen. They look at the relationship between how students respond to one element and another, and where you see the relationship being particularly strong when sense of belonging is higher. For instance, students' quality interaction with others on campus, their sense of institutional support, their perceived gains in learning. These tend to be correlated highly with sense of belonging. Why does it matter to us and when does it matter to us? This is a source from MIT. And it really has to do with the fact that belongingness matters in periods of uncertainty or transition. So when belongingness is questioned or upended, it can affect how students overcome challenges, how they navigate their new environments. So this is most pronounced during times of transition, like the start of school or entering a career, or perhaps moving into a new major or college. And so it can result in non-social activities like disengagement, not attending class, not completing coursework, not using services. It can result in poor academic outcomes, in addition to affecting the students' mental health, wellness, and feelings of social comfort, and so forth. All right, now you're primed a little bit on some of those sources, hopefully some good talking points for you. Now we're going to dig into the data. Where is the data coming from that we're going to talk about today? So one source of data is what's available to you in the Mentor Collective platform, and that comes from the research-backed surveys. They're generally referred to very broadly as assessments in our product that ask mentees and mentors questions related to many things, including sense of belonging. Now, I should add, almost all examples of the surveys that you might use include sense of belonging. There's one or two exceptions, but if you have selected a mentorship program design that included sense of belonging as a factor, then you will have data on that. And let me show you exactly what we mean by data on that. So, for example, most common example here would be a first-year student success program, graduate, undergraduate, online, transfer, whatever it might be. There will be 3 points at which the mentees and mentors are prompted to reflect on sense of belonging, among other things, right at the beginning of that mentorship, which is typically prior to the start of school or at the start of school. At some point in the middle, which is really up to you as the institution to determine that timing. And then finally, conclusion of the program or conclusion of the mentorship relationship. And so we look at those as formative and summative data points. Although I would say that students' end of their first year is certainly still formative. We haven't concluded their educational journey. There are 3 questions that we correlate or we associate with sense of belonging. I feel comfortable at my school. I feel I'm an important member of my school's community, and I feel supported at my school. So these are specifically about sense of belonging in the institution specifically. It's called a non-cognitive factor, and spoiler alert, there are other non-cognitive factors that are assessed in these surveys, including academic self-efficacy, including academic help seeking, and we're going to talk a little bit about how we can relate sense of belonging to some of those other elements. I'm going to pop into our demo site really quick to remind you of where these data live in real time. So when you are logged in to your dashboard and you have an active mentorship program, you will scroll down a little bit to this assessments tab, and you will see a lot of summary data about how much assessment data you have. How many results or respondents do you have? At the conclusion of a full cycle of a mentorship, you will see, scrolling down a little bit, a start of program assessment, a middle of program assessment, and an end of program, and you can see how many students have responded over time. You can also see a summary of how they have responded to different factors. I have this already showing how mentees responded to questions about sense of belonging. And again, it's broken down by start, mid, and end program survey. But you can toggle that over to another factor, of course. I can see how that score changes over time for that population. I can switch over to my mentor population, and I can see a pie chart distribution of the students who've responded on the 5-point scale above 3, below 3, or at 3, to see kind of how my students are breaking down at different points in the year. So this is a high level view of the aggregate of your data. And then also at the top of the screen, there's this cute little alert bell, which is telling me, I have 15 participants who have reported low sense of belonging since the last time I clicked in here and logged in. I can see exactly who those students are. I can see exactly how they responded. I can intervene. And I can also edit that filter. So I can change that filter to potentially be a different score than 3. I can make it less than 2, for instance, if I want to adjust that. So this is how we generally coach you on using the data in real time for effectiveness. Now what we're going to do is talk about, as we go today, we're going to talk about exporting these data for analysis purposes, either through our participant data file and or our assessment survey files, our start assessment, mid assessment, and end assessment survey data, all available in these flat files that we can manipulate, dive into, and kind of eat our hearts out with sense of belonging data. All right, so that's a high level view. We are going to make sure you're really comfortable with the format of these files and how to use them as we go as well. I should also add that Jen, I believe, has dropped in the chat, or will be about to, an article that summarizes everything we're doing today. So please don't worry about taking detailed notes. In our reporting and analytics section of our Partner Knowledge Center, you will find a impact analysis section, which will have 3 articles by the time we finish our series. And all of the research that I cited, all of the information about the surveys I just reviewed, and everything we're reviewing today is here with screenshots, links, and templates. So you can easily navigate through here and refer back to this as you go. All right, let's jump back in now that we've done a quick dive demonstration. And now we're actually going to do the impact analysis work. So when you are ready to say, how is my mentorship affecting sense of belonging? What is the relationship between sense of belonging and some of these other elements I'm trying to drive? This is how we're going to do it. There are 4 kind of conceptual suggestions we have for understanding impact. So these are assessment best practices specifically applied to this use case. The first is that you really want to think about setting targets. So when we look at what's the difference between good data and bad data, what's a good result and a bad result? Luckily, when we were just in the application there and I was giving you some groupings, we're giving you a little bit of a starting point here to say, maybe your target is for something to increase over time. Maybe your target is to have less than 10% below 3, right? So what is your target, if you have one, for student responses to these statements? I would probably suggest you not try to set a target for their intake, because we don't want to necessarily say that our goal is to enroll students who never experience crises of belongingness, but rather you think about how might those change over time, or how might we create moments of celebration or intervention. So our target might be that we want to intervene all of the time when a student has a belongingness below X, or that we want to see retention outcomes leveled out for students who have low sense of belongingness. So you really want to think about, what am I actually considering success here, or what am I considering progress, which might be a little bit of a more achievable target to set. And I would also argue mentee belonging is usually where people are focusing, but don't forget, you do have data about mentors. We see less, in aggregate, we see less of a change in their belongingness, but it is still there, that they potentially feel an even greater sense of community as they participate in a servant leadership way as a mentor. So you should consider whether you want to see changes or impact in both those populations or just one or the other. The next thing to think about is reflecting on the responses. So really spending some time looking at these data. And again, you can just do that right within the data visualizations, maybe looking back a year or two, what's different? What do you notice about the changes? How does this differ based on maybe your targets? How might that change based on a demographic group that you kind of filter down or segment into? And where do you see the opportunity to create interventions again? This is a great group exercise if you need to do that. The third recommendation is to explore the relationships between variables. So rather than looking at sense of belonging as a single dimensional concept, as we mentioned, there is strong literature and strong evidence for a relationship between sense of belonging and each of these concepts we put on the screen, between sense of belonging and academic self-efficacy, between sense of belonging and help seeking or resource utilization, also with GPA, as well as persistence, term to term, or fall to fall. So I would recommend, if you're going to study sense of belonging, that you also think about which of these, probably not all of them, are of most additional relevance to you. Is sense of belonging a means to an end for persistence? Is it in and itself something you are looking to achieve with your students? And it might be that we have a very high term to term enrollment, and our goal is to address the student's experience and their perspective and feelings and affect and health and wellness while they're here. Or it could be that we're trying to get that help-seeking behavior up, and that is why we're investing in sense of belonging. So really thinking here, how does this tie back to my student success strategy? Which numbers and concepts might I know decision makers or influencers at my institution respond best to? And how do I include those in my data set? Because they're all available to you. And then finally, having that action plan. This is a really simple action plan format. But one of the things that you can get lost in with data is just so many things you're curious about, and then you end up with a bunch of data and no action. So really thinking like, what would I do with the answer to this question, right? How would I act, or how might someone else act if I had the answer? Am I using this data point to influence or gain buy-in? Am I using this data point to make a decision? And so on and so forth. All right, so those are our general recommendations. Get ready, because we are ready to dive deep into the land of pivot tables and VLOOKUPs and lots of other fun things that you do not have to have a PhD to do. So let's talk about how to conduct your own impact analysis. And I should add, what we're doing here and in our templates is we are giving you one baseline template for how to approach this. It is not the only way to organize data. It is not the only way to query data. What we wanted to do, though, was give those of you who didn't have a formula or a starting point something to begin with that was backed in an expert's expertise. Remember, we have Dr. C.G. Heiser developing these protocols for us, that it's based in research, and that you're not kind of fumbling around with the data independently. But feel free to go beyond what we're proposing. Okay, so 6 steps for impact analysis, which we will review in every one of these series, starting with defining our population and ending with articulating our impact statements. We're going to walk through it now. If you are following along and actually looking at your screens right now, it can actually help to go to the article, download the template, log into your website, and follow along with us right now. Or you can kind of pay attention and make some notes for when you want to return to this later. So the first step is really to clearly articulate who we are assessing right now. Who are the students that we are trying to better understand? For instance, the relationship between peer mentorship and sense of belonging, or sense of belonging and retention. We really want to write a very detailed description. This is important because when we get to the next step of querying, we have to be very specific about which students should be in our data queries. And if we are not personally an institutional effectiveness or assessment professional, and we are meeting with or talking with them, we're going to lose credibility really fast if our data points do not line up with institutional data sets, and if we're not using institutional data definitions. Many of you have institutional effectiveness offices with publicly available web pages that will say things like FTIC, which is an acronym for First Time in College. So is your program first time in college students or transfer students or both? How do you make sure you're really clear about that? How do we define a freshman or first year student? What are the credit hours that define that, instead of just saying first year students? So here's an example of a simple but clear definition. Transfer students with less than 45 credit hours who were enrolled in either fall of 23 or spring of 24. So we've got our time frame and our population more clearly defined. Maybe yours is transfer students who were undecided, or transfer students in the College of Engineering, and so forth. This also helps us look at the next phase of analysis. So if we're looking at students enrolled of fall of 23 and spring of 24, then we're going to be assessing impact in spring of 24, fall of 24, spring of 25, right? If we look ahead. The next step is to start identifying the data we need. I'm going to tell you exactly what data you need from the MC platform, and we're going to show you how to get it. but you will also have to query and request data from the SIS, Student Information System, or other system of record at your institution. You might have direct access to that to write those queries yourself. Most likely you're going to need to request this from someone else. And when you request it, you're going to need to explain to them why you're asking and what you're going to do with it, which is why step 1 is so important. So institution ID is the most important field. You can see it is little asterisk and bolded on both sides because it's how we connect these data sources. It's how you will connect those data sources when you learn how to do that today. And then the other relevant fields from your SIS, this is the short list you can add to, is kind of related the term-to-term enrollment. So if we're looking at retention or persistence in any way, we want to bring in the next term's enrollment and maybe the term after that, or next year's enrollment. Most institutions will skip summer as a concept of continuous enrollment. If you are a trimester or quarter system, you really need to think about which enrollment terms make sense to you. GPA is another one of those variables, and then any meaningful demographic variables such as Pell eligibility, first-year student status, race or ethnicity, student identified gender, so on and so forth. You will want to think about what matters to you in your program design and what you want to request for segmentation. We're going to talk through exactly what you're getting from the Mentor Collective export, but you're going to have access to what was the role of this participant. Were they a mentee or mentor? What's the program status, meaning were they a fully matched participant? Did they register and not make it to the next stage? So on and so forth. And then I have some acronyms here because I ran out of space on the page, but the export will also include their most recent response to that survey, the sense of belonging factor, the academic self-efficacy factor, the academic help-seeking factor, are all averaged for you there. So you don't have to worry about averaging each of those 3 questions. Now, if you want to use individual questions, they are still available to you in another export. What we're starting with here is a fairly simple way to do this impact analysis to begin with. And then we're also recommending you bring in conversation reports. These are not required fields, but they could be helpful in your next level of analysis. We have provided you with a template file. So one of the first things we recommend you do here is download the template linked in our article. And we're going to go through all of this today so that you can copy and paste in the file, the information from both files or all of the files. So what's the user ID, roles, first generation status, averages, etc. And we're going to show you how to do that in a moment. All right, here we go.
When conducting an impact analysis, you will need to first gather and prepare your data. In this video, we will walk through how to export data from Mentor Collective's partner dashboard and clean up the data set so that you can focus on the most important and relevant data. Let's first walk through how to find and export your data from the Mentor Collective partner dashboard. Once you log into your partner dashboard, you will want to navigate to the exports page, which you can find on the left-hand side all the way at the bottom. As you can see, there are multiple options for exports here, but the participant data exports provides the most comprehensive information about the students in your program. In this example, we will be exporting data for all participants. This is an example of what you might see when you open that downloaded CSV from the partner dashboard. Now you will also likely need data from your student information system. You can use that system's process for exporting data directly or work with the relevant offices at your institutions for assistance. This is an example of what that data may look like. Now you have data from both your student information system and Mentor Collective's partner dashboard. You likely have more data than you actually need for your analysis, so we recommend deleting all of the data that is not needed. I personally find it helpful to highlight all of the columns containing data that I need for my analysis, and then simply delete the rest. You can do Command click or Control click, depending on if you're using a Mac or a PC, and select the columns or drag across all of the ones that you want to delete. And then do Control click or right click to delete those columns. And now you have much more manageable data to work with for your analysis.
Great. Really helpful, simple suggestions there. We're ready to move on to our next step. Now it is time for us to actually merge that data because we have the Mentor Collective data file and the institutional data file, not everything is on the same row, and that's what we need them to be to do this analysis. So we are now going to use that core or key identifier to combine these data sets for analysis.
Because we often need to pull data from multiple sources, you will need to merge the data into one data set for analysis. In this video, we will walk through how to merge data gathered from your student information system and Mentor Collective's partner dashboard. This merge is possible by identifying a unique common data point in both data sets and conducting either a VLOOKUP or XLOOKUP to pull related data. In this video, we'll be walking through a VLOOKUP. Let's say we're starting with data pulled from our partner dashboard for our analysis, but we do need information from our student information system, specifically GPA. So if we want to pull that GPA data into this tab, we can create a new column here. I'm going to call it GPA. And then to start the VLOOKUP for this first student, I'll type equals VLOOKUP with an open parentheses. And it tells us here each value needed for this formula. The first being search key. And this is the key that we want to look up in our second data set. In this case, we're going to use institution ID or school ID since it's a unique static data point that we have in both data sets. And I'll just select that first cell for the student with a comma. And now we're looking for range. And this is where you want to look for the search key and the return value. In this case, that information all lives in our student information tab. We will start by making sure we include institution ID since that's our search key and drag over to the data that we want to return, in this case, GPA. Another comma, and now we're looking for index. And this is the column number in the range we've selected containing the value you want to import. So in this case, our search value is the first column, and the values we want to return GPA are in the second column. So we'll type in 2. With another comma, and is sorted as referencing whether you want to use the approximate or exact match to your search key. Typically, you want the exact match, which is what we want in this case as well, so I'll type false. Close the parentheses and click return, and now you have imported GPA for this very first user. And to apply this to the rest of the people in your data set, you can just double click on this little corner here. And now you have GPA data for all of the students in your analysis. And we've managed to merge all of our data into one data source, and you can actually begin conducting your analysis.
So some fun with VLOOKUPs. I also personally use XLOOKUP a lot, which is a slightly more forgiving formula. Both are totally valid are going to give you the magic of merging these data sources. I want to add, we do have some great resources on these non-Mentor Collective specific practices in our Partner Knowledge Center. And Jen, who runs our education program, has brought together a couple different Ask the Expert options for you to join us live if you want a little bit of coaching on how to do these types of things for either an impact analysis or anything else that you're trying to do with your data sets as well. So if you are looking to increase your savviness with merging data sources and you're stuck without a resource or you don't have someone who's a data wizard to call to coach you through it, feel free to give us a shout and we'll do our best to support you. All right, next up in our steps is creating a pivot table. So this is kind of the tricky part, data cleanup, data finding. This can sometimes take most of the effort. And now we're really getting into the fun with what can we learn about the relationships between all these data points. Pivot tables are super fun. They're like a superpower if you haven't already developed this ability, not just for the purpose of impact analysis, but for everything else you could do with the wizardry of data. So what we are going to do is start to take all this giant pile of data and condense it into something that's asking questions about relationships between variables.
One of the best ways to quickly summarize and categorize a large amount of data is to create a pivot table. In this video, we will walk through how to create a pivot table for your analysis. Once you navigate to your data set, we're going to select all of the data that you may want to include in your pivot table. Once you click the cell in the top left-hand corner, you can click Command-Shift right arrow or Control-Shift right arrow, depending on if you're a Mac or a PC user, and then Command or Control-Shift down arrow to select all of the data. Then you'll click Insert Pivot Table. And in this case, we're going to go ahead and just add this to a new sheet. Now you have an empty pivot table, and you can select what you want to include in your rows, columns, and values. In this example, I specifically want to compare a student's most recent average sense of belonging score and their GPA. So for the rows, I'm going to go ahead and select GPA. For the column, I will add most recent sense of belonging average. And then for the values, I'm going to want a count of the GPA. It defaults to some here, but I do want a count. And count A is actually typically the best option when trying to get the count of all cells in the range you select that contain any type of information, not just numbers. In this case, for GPA, count would be fine. This only looks at numbers, but it's good practice to use count A. And now you have a pivot table comparing students' GPA and their most recent sense of belonging average score. If you want to dig even further, you can edit the pivot table and add some filters. For example, let's say we specifically want to look at data only for mentees matched in the mentorship program. So we can filter by role to only show mentees, and program status to only show those who are matched, to adjust the data that you see. Now we only see data for mentees who are matched in the program. And now you know how to create a pivot table for your impact analysis.
We're going to get to use these a lot. Lauren is giving you one example, but I just want to point out that in our article and what we talk about is that there are a number of different pivot tables you might want to create. She just shared an example of one related to GPA, but we can also explore some of those for a sense of belonging against academic self-efficacy average, and so on. So our final step is to reduce that data. As you can see, that data set was quite broad, very discrete. We really want to look at some summaries or condensations of that data. So in the sense of belonging guideline spreadsheet we just shared, you have access to a summary tab, which gives us a way to look at what we're showing here is how our mentored students' average sense of belonging scores, let's say below 3, at 3, and above 3. So we're categorizing this data, and then we're comparing it again to academic self-efficacy below 3, at 3, and above 3. And then on the other side of our table, we're looking at the students who were actually a percentage of them. So we're looking at both the number of students who fulfill certain criteria and the percentage. So let's walk through how to get to that point with reducing data.
When you create a pivot table, depending on the data you're using, it may be simple enough to analyze immediately. However, if your pivot table is more overwhelming than helpful, it may make sense to reduce the data to identify more meaningful findings. In this video, we will walk through how to reduce the volume of data in your pivot table using bands. We're going to work with an example pivot table comparing GPA and the most recent average sense of belonging scores. As you can see, there's a lot of data here, which makes sense considering the data we're working with, as GPA in particular has quite a large range of possible values. So to help reduce the volume of this data, we suggest using bands commonly used or understood at your institution. We've created bands that I've included below for GPA, as well as the average sense of belonging score. So let's create and fill in this table with these new bands. I will walk you through filling out this first cell in the table. In this cell, I want the sum of all students who fall into both bands, a blank average sense of belonging score, and a GPA between 0.0 and 1.0. If it helps, feel free to first find this group of students in the pivot table and fill those cells with a color to make it easier to find when you're creating your sum formula. I'm going to fill the cells for this band in pink. Back in the table, I'll also color code this as well. And then I'm going to type in the formula for sum. So that is equal sum, open parentheses. And then I'm going to go back and select all of the data that I just identified. Close the parentheses and click enter. And now this automatically sums the total number of students that fall into both of these bands. We will then repeat these steps for the remaining cells in your table, which I will complete off screen. Alternatively, if you're familiar with the COUNTIFs function, that is also an option to gather this data. After you've calculated the sum for each band, you now have a much easier table to interpret for your impact analysis.
And then our final step in our impact analysis, actually, I'm going to pause and go back here for a moment. We've identified a few different summary tables for you here, persistence and belonging, mentorship and sense of belonging. So how has what's the relationship between these two factors? But what we also want to say is that when you were setting your targets and you were thinking about your population and all the variables at hand, you may have something else that you want to study or look at here. So these are models for you to start from. They're certainly not an exhaustive list of questions that you can ask with these data points. Once you get to the point where these data sets are merged, you'll probably have curiosities and interests and looking at relationships between things and want to explore that further. And this will give you a good foundation on how to do so. Finally, we look at what can we infer from the findings that we've pulled together from this impact analysis. For example, mentored students with an average sense of belonging above 3 are substantially more likely to report a self-efficacy score above 3. We can put some statistics around that. 60% more likely, or 1.x, or whatever it might be. Another version of that is there's a clear relationship between increased sense of belonging and increased belief in the ability to be academically successful. And even simpler layperson's version of that is when students feel like they belong, they also can be academically successful. So this is mirroring some of the research. And then finally, mentoring helps students feel like they belong and can believe. So this is how we can get to the point of saying something a little bit more clear and a little bit more understandable to a non-data driven audience, but then also have the data behind it to say these are some of the data research and our particular points of evidence of that being true for our institution. What can you do with these findings? So just to finalize where we're at so far, final tips for success for you as you're moving into hopefully having these data. Sharing the data is so key. If you've put in the effort to bring all of this together, try not to be stingy with your data. Go on a roadshow, join standing meetings, take it to faculty senate, president's cabinet, student government, wherever it might be. And then as you're going into those conversations, you might even come to the table with the data and a problem to solve. Asking to CJ wrote about a data and donuts party. So come to the table, get a donut, join us in conversation about what we see, how might we respond to these insights. Don't forget to look for opportunities to celebrate, highlight areas where you are making strides towards your goals, but also places where you have opportunities for improvement or progress. And then empowering others with this knowledge, really thinking about fresh perspectives and more inclusive decision making. I want to share one example. This is just a clip from the Indiana University Hoosier Scholars Mentorship Program. They presented it as a guest in a Mentor Collective webinar earlier this year, and they included some of their sense of belonging data. How many students submitted low sense of belonging scores, how sense of belonging increased from the beginning to the end of the program, what percentage of students were there. So a lot of this is descriptive. It's not even, comparing two different elements, but this is a great start for how to increase visibility of where our students are at and where they end. And in particular, I really loved the belonging stories that came out of the qualitative stories that came out about belongingness. These are testimonials from mentors and mentees in the program. So I just want to highlight for you, well, it's not a quantifiable impact, that one of the things you can consider in your Mentor Collective platform is a community tab. with video stories and written testimonials from participants. So really looking through these, this is just one of those rainy day, feel good, get a cup of coffee, give yourself a boost kind of things to do, to watch and listen to these testimonials. They could be from mentees and mentors starting their journey, talking about why they chose to participate, why they need this. Could be from mentees and mentors who are further along, talking about the impact that they've seen in themselves or others. And these can be really helpful and compelling things to put alongside your quantitative data when you are sharing it with others.
Some additional resources that I just want to direct your attention to. So again, that full guideline is in that Partner Knowledge Center. Our next session is September 25th, where we'll be chatting through how mentorship impacts MELT and term-to-term persistence. If you are looking for one-to-one support, again, that next Ask the Expert session will be on October 28th. We also have some additional content that are just related to VLOOKUPs, pivot tables, that kind of stuff. And that is in our Partner Knowledge Center and will be linked from that article that we just dropped in the chat. And I'll also put all these resources into an email that gets sent out to you after this session. So you don't have to scribble everything down right now. You'll get this in your inbox. We also want to flag that you are encouraged to email partner support if you have any responses that need a timely answer for data questions. That email is linked up there on the screen, partnersupport@mentorcollective.org. And Annemiek, before we wrap up really quick, I do see one question in the chat that is coming from Michael, and I am wondering if we can answer that live. So
Okay.
his question was, is there something in the Knowledge Center that ties together the cost of poor retention, so the cost of recruiting or onboarding or losing a student who drops out and recruiting a new student to replace them? Is there something that ties together that cost with an ROI analysis of the cost benefit of investing in MC?
Great question. I don't believe anything like that exists in the Knowledge Center, but it is a common conversation that our sales and account management team will have with institutions, especially if you're putting together a bit of a package to secure continued funding for whether it's grant funded, institutionally budget funded, et cetera, to say, here's some of our data points about impact, and here's some of the effect that that has on spend. So I would say, we'll pass this along to your account manager as well, just so that we can support you a little bit in this. A very simple way to do it is just to look at what is the average tuition a student pays. But to your point in chat, a lot more expense goes in to things. It's not just lost revenue, it's also lost expense in terms of things like the cost of admissions and so forth with that student. So happy to support you on this offline. Yeah, that's a great question. And it's where we're hoping your heads go, which is really thinking about ensuring that your mentorship programs are having the impact that you need them and want them to, adjusting your strategy to maximize it, which is something else I'd love for our partners to be doing, is how do I, let's say your outcome is strong impact, lots of effect. Well, what can we learn about making it even more impactful? And then finally, funding resources. People don't give away money for nothing in higher education. So most of you are continually needing to restate why investments in your staff, your programs, your services are worth it. And we're hoping this gives you a leg up in doing so. Great. Thank you all so much for joining. Jen, are we ready to wrap up for the afternoon?
Yeah, I think so.
Very good. Thank you again. We hope to see you next time. And thank you also in advance. You'll be prompted to give us some feedback when we finish this webinar. And Jen and I literally read every single one of those. So please do give us your thoughts. And again, thank you for your attention. Have a lovely afternoon.